What's up, Notre Dame fans? Mike Singer from blueandgold.com with On3 National Football Analyst JD PicKell talking Notre Dame's role in conference realignment. Very happy to have JD on. Does a great job with our On3 YouTube page. Make sure you go give that a follow, subscribe as well. So, JD, hope you're well, man. Make sure everyone hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to our channel if you have not done so yet. So, JD, just kind of give you a softball first. I mean, I felt like the coaching carousel was crazy this past offseason. And who would have thought we would have USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten Conference Realignment has been crazy right now. What's your biggest takeaway from, what's been going on the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's been absolutely nuts. We had players in the transfer portal, coaches, and now teams in the transfer portal. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was USC and UCLA's decision to ultimately kind of take their future into their own hand. And someone else was talking about essentially, if you're USC and you're a national brand, we'll take it even a step further. You're a global brand, even in some respects, in terms of how big they are in the sports world. They're not going to play their games forever at 10 o'clock Eastern. Like, for them to be tucked away into those time slots, and now for them to ultimately be able to collect a bigger check with what will be the new media rights deal in the Big Ten makes a lot of sense. A little bit unfortunate for the Pac-12 that they weren't able to somehow find a way to make it work, because they're losing, obviously, an enormous brand, like I mentioned, with USC. So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me.
It's going to be interesting. Like, not only like USC playing Maryland for a conference game going across the country, but like I would assume all of the sports are going to the Big Ten, right? I mean, that's going to be very expensive for a bunch of these non-revenue sports to have to travel across the country for basically all their road games. I feel like it's another factor in this, but something not people are talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that check for football is going to be pretty sweet deal, I would imagine. And I mean, on top of that, kind of changing gears, everyone was talking about Lincoln Riley and him running from the SEC and this, that, and the other. And maybe there was a level of that's true, but I have a really difficult time believing that there wasn't some sort of,
Okay.
hey, we might be going to the Big Ten, just so you know. I mean, if you're hiring a head football coach for as much money as they did, you probably let them know what's kind of in the works. And so I think that honestly gives some people, I would hope, a little bit more respect for Lincoln Riley, not so much running from competition. It's one man's opinion, but that's kind of where I fall in terms of another takeaway.
So obviously this is a Notre Dame channel, so let's shift to talking about the Fighting Irish. So I remember the COVID season. I mean, a lot of people out there saying, Fighting Irish saved the season for Notre Dame, kind of in what they did to make sure that they were playing. Notre Dame, once again, in a central role in all this conference realignment talk. You did a video earlier on Wednesday breaking down. It's like kind of they're the unsigned program out there for a recruiting term. They're kind of the belle of the ball. Everyone would love to get Notre Dame in their conference. So what's your stance about where Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman's program kind of lines up in all this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's obviously super fascinating given the climate that we're in. My train of thought is there's two different perspectives. There's the money perspective, which ultimately is going to make the decision. There's the football perspective. From a money standpoint, makes a ton of sense. I mean, Notre Dame has left money on the table before, but in terms of how much you can make by joining the Big Ten and with the NBC deal coming up in 2025, make a lot of sense for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten and cash in even a bigger check. In terms of the football perspective, I'm very curious to see how this plays out over the next few months, even I guess the next few years, with the whole trend of, hey, the super conference might be in the shadows, lurking, looming, this, that, and the other. So if we do go to the super conference model in your Notre Dame, how much does being independent sacrifice for you from a competition standpoint? I'm not saying it does, but I mean, today, it sounds like if you're a one-loss Notre Dame and a one-loss conference champion, having that extra weekend to prove yourself has really bode well for the teams that are in conference. So until it starts becoming an issue from a competition standpoint for Notre Dame, I think they're content to leave that money on the table. But when it starts to hurt the on-field return on investment from a football standpoint, then I think it's like, hey, we were undefeated and we were, for whatever reason, or we had one loss and we were left out of the college football playoff because we didn't get a conference championship. That's not okay ultimately, because that leaves more money on the table. So those are just things that I think we're going to have to consider as we unpack this whole conference realignment discussion, especially with Notre Dame.
So in a lot of the reports nationally, it does seem like Notre Dame's, for now, staying independent. But if Notre Dame is to join a conference, where would you like them to see? Like them to end up? Obviously, right now they have that little 5-game a season partnership, the ACC, which it's boring to me, to be honest. I mean, playing Virginia and Duke, and it just hasn't been that fun for me to watch because you've had FSU down the past several seasons, Miami. I mean, heck, even a school like Georgia Tech, like when I was in high school, Georgia Tech was very good. They were, competing for ACC titles all the time. It's just a lot different now. ACC's down. So would you like to see them full-time ACC, or is there maybe more of a geographical conference that makes the most sense for the Irish?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we're talking about geography when 2 California schools just joined the Big Ten. But I mean, with that being said, I think the Big Ten makes sense financially, makes sense geographically with them being in Big Ten country, and then it makes sense from a rivalry standpoint. They have games with Michigan and Michigan State that have a lot of shine to them. I mean, they have that home and home with Ohio State. That's going to be, I would imagine, one of the better non-conference matchups we see just strictly from a brand standpoint. So I think there's a lot to be gained from going to the Big Ten. The ACC seems like it is maybe, a Clemson away from having some issues of their own. So
Right.
I think Big Ten, if you were to jump onto a ship that you were more confident was going to float, I think the Big Ten's probably the best bet.
For the rest of this video, JD, we're gonna have you put on that Notre Dame helmet behind you. Just kidding.
I think there's a disclaimer. It says replica do not wear. So I think I mean, I'll do it. I mean, I'll do anything for the program here, but I mean, I'm just wanted to make sure you were aware that's a sticker that they have on there.
All right, we'll leave it on the shelf for now. But last question. I know you've been pretty excited. We even had a phone call recently about Notre Dame recruiting under Marcus Freeman, currently the number 1 class per the 2023 On3 consensus rankings. I mean, this is what Notre Dame's got to do to compete with the big boys in the South, right? I mean, they got to recruit at this level.
And it's funny because if you're reading between the lines, it's what Brian Kelly had an issue with at Notre Dame, talking about, hey, there were certain resources. And again, very much between the lines, but that was the sentiment I got when I was listening to Brian Kelly speak about Notre Dame. Then you have Marcus Freeman come in and just totally give the entire program and recruiting efforts a facelift. And I think the thing that sticks out the most to me is the way they're doing it. Like, this is not a stuffy Notre Dame, your grandpa's win one for the Gipper kind of operation. Like, they've taken that, revamped it, and made it super cool and appealed to high school athletes. And I think credit Marcus Freeman, credit his staff for saying, hey, we're going to kick it up a notch here at Notre Dame. We are Notre Dame. We're going to exercise that brand. We're going to go out and get the kids we want. And I understand there's different academic regulations and things that you can and can't do at Notre Dame that you can do at other schools. But I mean, ultimately, credit to Marcus Freeman and his staff for, in my opinion, making Notre Dame cool once again.
I'm going to go off script, and sneak in one more question. What have been your thoughts about Brian Kelly's first, 7 months or so at LSU? He's certainly been in the headlines for, his dancing and accent, right away. And they've had some recruiting success, but they've also had a lot of players leave the state of Louisiana and head elsewhere. Notre Dame's hoping to land Jaden Osbury, whose father played and currently works at LSU and goes to school basically on LSU's campus. Irish look to be the leader there per the On3 recruiting prediction machine. But yeah, what do you think about, kind of Brian Kelly's move to LSU so far?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, obviously, we'll kind of see what comes out in the wash once they start playing games. Didn't do himself any favors in the social media world with, like you said, the dancing and the accent that he all of a sudden developed a few hours into being in the state of Louisiana. But I mean, as a whole, I think he's just someone that's not necessarily the most palatable of coaches. He's not necessarily going to win a lot of press conferences, as I'm sure you're well acquainted with. So at the end of the day, the guy can coach, right? Like, they brought him to LSU for a reason, paid him what they did for a reason. Track record speaks for itself. So it may take a year or two for him to get his program at LSU, but ultimately, these first 7 months, I'm not necessarily taking a ton from it, just because, it is what it is. It's talking season and spring ball, and ultimately they're going to have to figure out who's playing quarterback for them. And so maybe in 6 games I'll have a better answer for you, but right now I think it's kind of just wait and see mode with Brian Kelly.
I know us on the Notre Dame side of things, we've had a lot of fun, just kind of chuckling at
As
maybe
you
what's
should.
happening in Baton Rouge, especially with, like you said, Marcus Freeman's taken some things that Brian Kelly said couldn't be done. It's been recruiting at such a high level. So JD, definitely appreciate you joining us. Notre Dame fans, make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video, subscribe to our channel for more content. Make sure you go to blueandgold.com, $1 for 1 year of premium access. Appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you next time.